So for the next paper, I'd just like to express my appreciation that the Melamu board and the Portavood Center included current and recent graduate students in our proceedings as speakers. I think it's very important for building the next generation of fans of the ancient Near East and of the Achaemenid world. So I'm delighted to introduce our third speaker of the day, who also stems from USC. This is Deirdre Klokov, who graduated with a degree in classics from Columbia University, and she's currently in her fourth year. Yes, do I have it correct? Yes, thank you. Her fourth year in the PhD program in classics at USC, focusing on Hellenistic history, and so a perfect person to invite to our conference. In particular, she is focusing on the Seleucid Empire. Today, she will speak to us on, as you can see, Laodike III and the Seleucid royal cult. So thank you, Deirdre, for joining the conference.
I have to join everybody else in thanking the organizers for bringing me to speak here today, and especially Marissa Stevens for what seems like tireless effort at organizing all of this. It must feel like herding cats at times, but we are all grateful. And to Professor Scheigen for not just including me here today, but for just all of the help that you've given me. It's greatly appreciated. Okay, so my very unimaginative title is up there, so probably no confusion about what I'm going to be speaking about today. So I will just begin. In a letter sent out to the satraps of the empire in early spring of 193 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus III made public his desire to increase the honors he paid to his wife, Laodike, because of the affection and the devotion she shows in her life with him and because she is pious towards the divine. This initial royal prostagma declared that the high priestess of Laodike were to be established in the same places as the high priests of the king himself, and were to wear golden crowns emblazoned with her portrait and to have their names included in contracts directly following names of the high priests of the king himself and of his ancestors. In one case, there are three versions of this text that survive from different locations. The daughter of the king, another Laodike, was to serve as high priestess for the cult of her mother. The newly established cult is thus presented as equal in dignity and in honors with that of the king and his ancestors, but although this cult was eponymous, there's actually no further evidence for its existence. There's no reference to the cult of the king and of his ancestors, nor to that of Laodike in Akkadian documents from the time or in Greek legal acts where we would expect to see it, including those from areas where we know that the cult was actually established. So the evidence indicates, clearly, that there was little effort put into promoting the spread or the survival of the queen's cult. So I'm hoping to explore here in brief early creation and development of the Seleucid royal cult before focusing more specifically on the cult for Laodike, and in particular its implementation or lack thereof throughout the empire. And I hope through Laodike to explore the manner in which Antiochus attempted to establish a dynastic program through the medium of a pan-imperial royal cult aimed at consolidating the legitimacy and the stability of the royal family. So, just briefly, some background. While ruler cult has in general been kind of exhaustively analyzed, systematic study of the cults of Hellenistic queens has been really lacking outside of the much better documented cult for the Ptolemaic queens and some work on Macedonian royal women until you get to the Roman period where, again, exhaustive analysis. For the Seleucids, this is due at least in part to the nature of the evidence, as is generally the case, since the subject has been largely restricted to the lacunose epigraphic material, particularly the inscriptions from the Greek cities of Western Asia Minor. And scholarship has really divided ruler cult between the sort of spontaneous, however you want to interpret that, spontaneous cults created by cities, and the centralized ruler cult stemming from the royal court itself. This divide that follows on the work of Stephen Price and John Ma has maybe been a little bit overemphasized. It seems likely that local civic cults and the cult that's promulgated from the royal court itself are aware of and certainly are exerting an influence on one another, as I hope to kind of demonstrate in the case for the Seleucid queens. So aside from this lovely prostagma that you see here, regarding the cult for Laodike, the only other evidence for the actual ritual of Seleucid royal cult is the list of the priests of the kings, all of which date to the reign of Antiochus III or later. Although, so Seleucid coinage provides no actual direct evidence for ruler cult before the reign of Antiochus IV, although ruler portraits and epithets on coins do suggest divinity and do therefore provide kind of indirect evidence for cult, as I hope we'll see later on. Evidence is extant for cults produced by Greek cities appearing around 280 BCE following Seleucus I's defeat of Lysimachus and his increased contact with the cities of Western Asia Minor. Shortly after Seleucus's death, his son and successor, Antiochus I, established a cult for his father at Seleucia in Pieria. More significantly for our purposes here, Stratonike, who is the wife, scandalously, of both Seleucus I and Antiochus I, received cult at Smyrna in the form of Aphrodite Stratonike and at Delos. And she's mentioned, as we saw earlier today, in a significant departure from Babylonian tradition in the Borsippa cylinder of Antiochus I, which has been mentioned many times over the past couple of days. Lucian's De Assyria also associates her with the construction of a temple. It's been discussed exhaustively by Kyle Erickson that whereas Seleucid men are not always connected to a particular god, a particular divinity, except in the sort of early cases of Seleucus I and Antiochus I, royal women are nearly always assimilated into the cult of Aphrodite in this early Hellenistic period. And there's the examples of the famous courtesans of Demetrius, who's the father of Stratonike, Lamia and Leana, and also very famously the two wives of Ptolemy II, Arsinoe II and Berenike, who are famously sort of assimilated with Aphrodite. Erickson suggests that this may be reflective of a model which allows for female deification while still reflecting the female's subordinate role as lover or mother. I would like to suggest that the association with Aphrodite carries a little bit of a more complex meaning, reflective of the political and the euergetic and the diplomatic roles of royal women. Certainly the evidence at least suggests an early and developing interest in the divinity of Seleucid royal women and their association with Aphrodite, suggesting that Antiochus III, rather than creating something sort of novel out of whole cloth, is working within an earlier established tradition when he expanded this royal cult to include his wife. Prior to the establishment of royal cult for Laodike, 4 cities had previously granted her divine honors, including Teos and Iassos, Teos in 204-203, and Iassos sometime between 195 and 193. The prior existence of these civic cults may shed a little bit of light on the development of cult for Antiochus himself, who likewise had local or civic cults early in his reign. In Teos, in this sort of famous inscription, girls preparing for marriage progressed, crowned and dressed in white, to bathe in the waters of a fountain on the Agora, which was renamed as the Fountain of Laodike, while Iassos commanded that young men and women who are on the verge of marriage make a sacrifice to Queen Aphrodite Laodike. In each case, the specifically female sphere of the cult, its sort of Aphrodite function for the protection of family and fertility, can be placed in contrast to the more martial attributes of the king, her brother husband, although of course not actually siblings, not actually her brother. Antiochus may have considered that this association of his wife with Aphrodite could serve as a perfect extension of his attempts to emphasize the legitimacy and unity of the royal family. leading him to capitalize on the power that Laodike's social position and her gender granted her, and thus uniting the coercive and referent spheres of power in a united ruling couple. Someday I'll get the scale of slides right. To return to the initial royal decree establishing cult for the queen, with which I began, inscriptions bearing the prostagma regarding Laodike have been found kind of scattered across the empire. One at Eritza in Phrygia, one at Kermanshah in western Iran, and Laodicea in western Media. The wide geographic spread may simply represent the oddities of the survival of evidence. That's certainly possible. It's also likely to represent a desire to create a constant reminder of the stability and unity of the royal family in unstable and distant regions. As has been noticed by many scholars, Phrygia and Lydia apparently required the presence of military colonies to quell the unrest following the suppression of the usurper Archaeos, while Eritza and Kermanshah were both phylakai, military zones created to control regions of unrest. In addition to the geographic spread of the cult, much has been made of the appointment of high-ranking women as high priestesses in the cult of Laodike, such as in the satrapy of Caria, Berenike, the daughter of the semi-independent dynasty of Ptolemaic, with whom Antiochus claimed a familial bond. Significantly, it is the future Laodike IV, the daughter of Antiochus III and Laodike III, who's high priestess of her mother in Media, the place through which her husband, Antiochus the Younger, would have to proceed to go when he went to rule the upper satrapies, when he was associated in rule with his father. None of these arguments are helped by the fact that everyone is named Laodike and Antiochus, so hopefully this is making some kind of sense. The appointment of the daughter as high priestess of the royal cult in Media, much like associating the son in rule with the king, his father, works to emphasize and intensify Seleucid presence in the east. Dynastic worship thus becomes a means of imperial unification in the east, beyond the initial civic cults that are mostly focused on the Western Greek polis. The wide geographic spread of the decrees establishing Laodike's cults, and particularly their presence in locations dominating important routes throughout the empire, one, the road from Media to Babylonia, another on the road that leads to Susiana and Persis, becomes therefore a tool allowing and enforcing the recognition of a unified Seleucid dynasty through the presence of not just one, but two Adelphic couples. Iconographic evidence from coins issued during the reign of Antiochus III further demonstrates that in adding his wife, again, not really sister, to his dynastic program, the king sought to further emphasize their close ties as sibling gods in a manner which is reminiscent, of course, of the Ptolemaic model of the Theoi Delphoi. Bronze coinage, I think, is of a special significance here. With its more limited geographic circulation, bronze issues are more likely to reflect local significance or innovations more than the more conservative precious metal issues. And I have to apologize here because I'd love to show you some very shiny, beautiful coins, but unfortunately, bronze coins tend to look like lumps, so you may have to take some of this on trust, but hopefully you can see a little bit of detail. So in particular, we may consider the jugate bust of the twin divinities, Apollo and Artemis, found on the obverse of a bronze type issued from Seleucia on the Tigris. The association of Antiochus with Apollo is clear, and Professor Strootman talked about this earlier, so I won't go into it. I'll just say that there's obviously a very strong link to this divinity who's associated with the foundation of the dynasty, and he's present in multiple types on the generally very iconographically conservative coinage of Antiochus III. Given a date ranging from between 204 and 187, the coins associated with the period in which Antiochus is interested in reorganizing and codifying the dynastic cult, making an intended association between Artemis and Laodike, I think at least likely. This attempt to symbolize the close familial ties between the rulers and their resemblance to these divine siblings, may also have had a particular local significance. We can consider Strabo's portrayal of the Babylonian city of Borsippa as sacred to Apollo and Artemis. And again, Professor Streetman talked a lot about the sort of royal dynastic triad, the religious triad in Babylonia, so I won't get into any of that. The imagery does emphasize the closeness of Antiochus and his sister queen, while underscoring traditional associations with the patron god of the Seleucids. Additionally, bronze types from Seleucia on the Tigris, Susa, and the Rose Mint show Artemis on the reverse, associated with heads of either Apollo or Antiochus on the obverse. In several instances, as in the image here, you can see that she is extending a crown onto the royal name, which is inscribed below. Oftentimes, it's very difficult to tell whether you're looking at a head of Apollo or Antiochus or Apollo as Antiochus, so some leeway there. Another type issued from Susa under, obviously, Antiochus III, presents a female head wearing an elephant headdress facing to the right on the obverse, and a forward-facing Artemis carrying a bow and a torch on the reverse. You may have to take me at my word there, but I promise that's what's happening. The identity of the female figure in the elephant headdress is unclear. We don't know who this is, but we may possibly interpret it as intended to recall Laodike, given the Artemis figure on the reverse. The type could be read as paired with a type from Seleucia on the Tigris, the other coin shown here, which shows a young male bust wearing an elephant headdress on the obverse and a horse head facing to the left on the reverse. Again, you might have to just take my word for that. The dates are early, between 209 and 204, but still well within the period of Antiochus's interest in royal cult. If we read these two coins as related, despite the fact that they issue from different mints, they may represent an early attempt at the association of Antiochus and Laodike with a paired divinity, an initial foray into the creation of this pan-imperial cult of the queen and the king, an attempt to present the royal couple as male-female complements to one another, each performing in and sufficient to their own sphere. Considering the evidence suggesting a significant, I hope, significant attempt at a centralized dynastic cult built around the unity and legitimacy of the royal couple, or royal couples, plural, why then did the cult of Laodike disappear so quickly and nearly completely from the record? Obviously, we could say chance survival of evidence. With the Seleucids, this is always a very real consideration. But historical circumstances obviously come into play here. In the 190s, Antiochus had crossed, obviously, as we know, the Hellespont into Europe, where he came into conflict with the expanding sphere of Roman interests. I'm always very happy to blame the Romans for things. In the winter of 192-191, Livy tells us that Antiochus was in Greece with a small force in aid of his Aetolian allies. And while there, he married a young Chalcidian woman. Now, scholars such as Van Nuffelen and de Boord have argued that with this marriage, Laodike was then repudiated or set aside, divorced in some manner, gotten rid of. And this would definitely, if true, explain what happened to her cult. I think the total silence of ancient sources regarding this kind of repudiation, beyond just the simple, very short recording of this actual marriage, would suggest otherwise. Laodike was a cousin of Antiochus III, a daughter of Mithridates II of Pontus, a family with very vaunted claims to descent from one of the 7 sort of original Persians who killed the Magus, this famous story. Her significant epigraphic presence indicates that she did possess some level of autonomy and economic power and seems to have functioned as a kind of legitimizing force in her husband's reign. Unlike previous Seleucid marriages, she had actually been proclaimed queen by her husband in Antioch shortly after the marriage, which is clearly an attempt to reinforce the legitimacy of this royal marriage, and especially, of course, of any children that it might produce, and it produced many. It seems wildly unlikely to me that a marriage with a Greek girl more than 20 years following this initial wedding with Laodike could impact the security of her position or the status of her children in any way. It's much more likely, I think, that the increasing conflict with the Romans simply drew the attention of the king to other matters. He had a lot on his mind. And while the struggles and defeat of Antiochus with the Romans would have been sufficient reason for the Greek cities to avoid making any impolitic outward displays of loyalty to the royal house, such as, say, participating overtly in royal cult, while control of the West was in flux. So I want to close by glancing briefly at a sort of epilogue to this experiment in cult in the name of Laodike III. And in particular, I wanted to look at the image of an unidentified goddess who appears on the coinage of her son, Antiochus IV. These are slightly better images. This goddess has been discussed by Panos Yosef and Kathy Lorber. She's unfortunately not clearly identified by title or attribute, but she does appear on the reverse of several separate series of bronze coins from Seleucia on the Tigris, a bronze type from Seleucia on the Ulaios, Susa, and bronze coins from an uncertain mint in Koile, Syria. In the largest type from Seleucia, the goddess appears seated, facing left in a high-backed throne, extending a small figure of Nike, victory, which is why we call her the goddess Nikephoros. She wears a broad stephane that's often associated with Hera or Aphrodite, with a scepter kind of diagonally in the background, and a six-pointed star above her head. In later issues, a large bird appears near the feet of the goddess. It looks like a kind of a swan or a duck with a really long neck. I'm not great with birds. Each of the three types also displays the cult epithet of the king, Theos Epiphanes, the god manifest, an epithet which is pretty rarely used or pretty rarely apparent in the East. Given this kind of odd mix of attributes, a lot of different identities have been suggested for this goddess. The most likely and probably the safest identity is that this is some form of Aphrodite Nikephoros. Aphrodite, again, with whom Stratonike and then Laodike III were associated in their civic cults. Indeed, we know of two depictions of Aphrodite Nikephoros with Hellenistic royal women, one of which is a series of bronze coins from Smyrna depicting Aphrodite Stratonikis. The other is a stater with Queen Amastris. Additionally, Lorber and Yosef have posited, kind of adventurously, that the image of the goddess on the Nikephoros coins bears a strong resemblance to surviving portraits of Laodike. There's one on a seal impression. While the Queen Mother at this point would have been getting on somewhat in years, and the dates of her death are confusing and very much argued about, it's possible that her son, Antiochus IV, may have drawn on the religious potential his mother still represented, the legitimizing potential that she still represented, by deliberately incorporating her image into what seems a highly generalized, a highly syncretized image of the goddess Nikephoros, in order to further enhance his own legitimacy and divinity following what we could politely refer to as the Troubles at the end of his father's reign. And so it's possible that the Nikephoros of Antiochus IV is deliberately recalling not just the assimilation of the goddess with Seleucid royal women, but more specifically with his mother, Laodike, signaling yet another new phase of the ever-evolving Seleucid royal cult and new life for the cult of Laodike. Using the case of Laodike, I have argued, semi-coherently, I hope, for a development of Seleucid royal or dynastic cult, which is embedded in and indebted to John Maugh's model of empire as interaction and negotiation. This is a model that's so appealing that I think it can sometimes lead us to forget that this interaction and negotiation was a two-way street, and thus not always entirely successful. Antiochus seems to have overestimated both the willingness of elites to engage in dynastic worship on a pan-imperial level, which is a very different thing from the choice to offer cult yourself from your own city, as well as the appeal of Greek-style ruler cult beyond the world of the Greek cities. The Roman defeats of Antiochus and the loss of the territories of Western Asia Minor would have made a Greek-style ruler cult suddenly much less relevant, while the death of Antiochus the Younger, very soon following after the establishment of Laodike's cult, would have really problematized this dynastic image the two paired sibling couples Antiochus had attempted to promote. Here, as elsewhere, the Seleucids can seem to maybe suffer a little bit by comparison with the Ptolemaic model, but I would argue that in this case that it's the journey rather than the destination which deserves our attention. And this journey of Antiochus III and Laodike towards the promotion of dynastic security through a pan-imperial ruler cult has a lot to teach us about negotiations behind the development and representation of dynastic legitimacy in an empire that's marked by cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity. Thank you.